everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Veil Tarot and Astrology. My name is Candice Marie. Thank you for joining me. Back at it with another midweek video. Hopefully you guys are doing well. You're alive and thriving post eclipses. We made it through the other side. Been kind of really dissecting and breaking down all of these conjunctions and oppositions that are taking place in the fixed signs. And finally, this is the last aspect that I wanted to touch on today, and that is the Sun in Scorpio transit and the square that the Sun is making to Saturn in Aquarius. So big thank you to everybody who has been commenting and giving thumbs up and sharing these videos, joining memberships and subscribing. We are less than 150 people away from hitting 10K. So hopefully if you are not already subscribed, please hit that button below. That way you are alerted as to when we have new content coming out on the channel. Have seen so much growth over the last year, and I'm going to talk a little bit how that ties into a Saturn Sun transit for me personally. I'm going to give you guys some food for thought about that. As always, just so you guys know, I'm a Western astrologer, so I'm going to really put emphasis on the transits from Western perspective. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what this transit means, how this might play out for you. Those of you guys who want to know how it's going to affect you personally, I would recommend, I'm going to reroute you guys to another video. Go and check out my November horoscopes for November 2022. I go through all of the 12 signs. There are actual timestamps so you can go directly to your rising sign. I do touch on the Sun square Saturn for each and every one of the 12 signs and talk to you about how it's going to be playing out for you personally. This is just more of my general overview. All right, thank you. Thank you for letting me make that announcement. So, this transit is really kind of setting up the better part of like the next couple of days, really November 9th, 10th, 11th. 11th is when it's going to be perfecting. So we're really going to take a look at the next 2 days or so. So this is transit Sun in Scorpio coming into a square with Saturn. Very textbook themes in terms of the Sun square Saturn are delays, sometimes frustration, having to overcome something, anything in regards to just really challenging lessons that require you to really kind of grow up. That seems to be kind of like the general overall theme of this. But what I really want to touch on is how this is a part of like a bigger sequence of transits that have been taking place really since the Sun came into conjunction with Saturn earlier this year. As we know, astrology transits are all of these different aspects and configurations that tell a story as the transits unfold over time. So I want to take you guys through this Sun-Saturn cycle, talk a little bit about what's happened throughout the various Sun-Saturn transits, both the conjunction that really kicked this off earlier this year, the squares and the oppositions that are leading us actually to February of 2023, where we see a new Sun-Saturn conjunction taking place. Just to help you kind of play astrological detective and get an idea of what's been worked on really all year long. And right now we're kind of like in the dismantling phase. So I'll explain that to you guys, okay? Okay, so let me take you guys through the various kind of transits that we have had. And obviously we'll talk a little bit about the archetypes of Saturn and also the Sun. So I want to take you guys back to when the Sun and Saturn first came into conjunction this year in the sign of Aquarius. So that was taking place February the 3rd, 2022. Here we go. So this was when the Sun-Saturn cycle started, okay? So we've got the Sun, which represents like vitality, ego, creativity, our self-expression, right? Anything in regards to like our heart's desires. So if you're looking at your natal chart and you're like, what's going on? Just take a look at where Aquarius is in your chart. That house is where the Sun and also the Saturn conjunction was shining a light on a contractual maybe agreement, a goal, something where you felt like there was like some heavy karma or some limitation or just something that you really had to kind of buckle down and work really hard on. Now we know that Saturn has been in and out of Aquarius since 2020, finally at the end of 2020, fully moving into the fixed air sign of Aquarius with Jupiter. So this was already like a year into that transit of having Saturn in Aquarius, moving into the second decan. So it's really dealing with like how we're going out and socializing and integrating with other people. We're getting a little bit beyond ourselves. And that was when the Sun and Saturn first had the conjunction. So there was like a commitment or a rising up, a maturing in some sense, okay? So think about what goals or what things you were striving to achieve or what timelines you were setting for yourself in the Aquarius area of your life. Now I'm going to take you guys to the very first square that we had on May 14th, 2022. Here we go. And this was at 24 degrees. Okay. So those of you guys who are kind of newer to astrology, conjunctions like the one that we had in February, a conjunction is one of the strongest aspects you can have in astrology. It represents like a fusing of something together, right? Two planets fusing together. So Sun and Saturn can be mature, serious, right? Kind of like a bit dull or a bit kind of down or wise, committed, mature, depending on how you look at it. I mean, I think having Saturn in its ruling sign of Aquarius, having the Sun being in its fall in Aquarius is a bit of like a kind of like a negative and a positive. So it creates like a neutral situation. So when we reflect back on what was happening in February, there was this whole, okay, I don't want to make sacrifices, but I have to make sacrifices in this area of our life. And it's kind of hard to miss, like when Sun and Saturn comes together, there's definitely some like karmic things that are at play within that like 48-hour period where we have to rise to the occasion. So then we move to the square that took place on May 14th when the Sun in Taurus comes into 24 degrees and it forms the square with Saturn. So unlike the conjunction where there is like this fusion and there's this awareness, similar to the first quarter square that we see in the lunar phase, this represents like an opening up and like the first real challenge that we have in regards to our creative process, because it's the Sun, or our egos or our joy, our vitality. So you want to look at what was happening around mid-May and where that was actually really challenging some of the things that you were setting out to achieve when it comes to Saturn in Aquarius. Then, oh, and I guess I should say with squares in general, these hard 90-degree angles, it's the energy of Mars. So you have to act on something, you have to do something. So likely with like, you know, Sun in conjunction to the North Node, it's highlighting how we want to feel and what we're doing and what we're working on, what we're building, if we're having pleasure, and that's getting checked by Saturn. And Saturn is in a superior position. So likely we were seeing this as like the very first kind of road bumps, speed bumps, stop signs, you know, that were limiting us from being able to move forward. Then we came into the Sun in opposition to Saturn, and this took place in August. So it was August 13th, 2022, where we had the Sun in its ruling sign, Leo, Saturn in its ruling sign, Aquarius, all coming into this like jam-packed square with all of these placements that were in Taurus. So quite interesting end of July going into August. You guys remember those grand fixed squares. So where the oppositions differ, there is this sense of like two things being able to coexist, right? The conjunction says we must do this. The square says, okay, time to get the show on the road, get active. And the opposition can represent a separation of two things, or it can represent acknowledging something and feeling like, okay, we have to do both. So oppositions can have you feeling kind of stressed, very thin. This is not the best example of an opposition. If we were just to see, you know, no other aspects kind of playing out, we didn't have all of this kind of noise with the squares going on with the North Node, Uranus, and Mars and Taurus, it'd be a very different situation. I think it's just a matter of being able to acknowledge that we have the ability to commit to our dreams, reevaluate our dreams with Saturn retrograde. And then the Sun in Leo and Venus in Leo is actually pretty strong. So there's a sense of like what we need in an individual sense, like what we're romanticizing, what we're creating, our playtime, having fun, having a good time. And then also recognizing that there is a need to be able to join with other people, have opportunities to kind of network and be able to be a part of the collective, right? Be an individual, acknowledge that we have individual interests and talents, but be able to share that with others. But you kind of lose that in the fact that you're coming out of, Sun square Uranus, Sun square Mars is a little different. I have always saw, and I was looking at the transits in 2020 and 2021, really looking at the summer of 2022, knowing that when the North Node Mars and Uranus conjuncted at the end of July going into August, that it was going to form squares to Leo and also Saturn, and it represented physical or financial changes that allowed us to go deeper into Leo. And this is where I feel like we saw a lot of individuals finally start speaking up and kind of not necessarily going along with any particular narrative. So if you're somebody who was like a creative and you were working with a group of people, you might have started feeling like you're going your own way. If you were somebody who was, always really a part of a group of friends or a network or a union or a collective, you might have started feeling like on a heart or on a creative level that there is a need to kind of, forge your own path. So definitely really unique astrology that doesn't quite highlight the opposition as best. And then that would be the same energy as like a full moon. So I know we're not talking about lunations or anything, but we do have Saturn in opposition to the sun. So it is this like climax period. And for many people over the summer, it was like this jump off that was like, okay, now we need to jump into like the next big thing, or we need to acknowledge what we're really most passionate about. Then we get into now where we have the sun in Scorpio coming into the square with Saturn, and this is what we would call the 3/4 square, right? Because we've already had the opposition. Now this is going to be perfecting on November 11th, but like I said, the 10th, the 9th, 10th, 11th, like you're feeling it even into like the 12th. Okay, so let's just say the 10th through the 12th. We have the sun in a square to Saturn. So the actual square is going to take place actually earlier in the day. It looks like it's going to be squaring around 18 degrees and change. So it'll be right around the later evening of November the 10th going into to the 11th, depending on your time zone. But my interest gets piqued because once again, and I've said this several times, we're seeing that same kind of degree where we had Mars and the North Node and Uranus conjunct at the end of July going into the beginning of August. So I treat that particular degree point almost like an eclipse where it's just going to keep getting reactivated. So whether it's planets going through Scorpio that are opposing that, if it's Saturn that has been moving now direct, that's squaring that, and finally the sun square Saturn, and it's shy of about 1.5 degrees of an opposition to Uranus. So people keep asking me, where's the craziness coming from? I'm like, is it the opposition to Uranus where we see sudden kind of pivots? Is it the square to Saturn where there's karmic stuff playing out? I really don't know. I can't tell you. I can just tell you that quite a turbulent period of time coming off of this lunar eclipse in Taurus. And really once we get to the next lunation, when we get to this incoming new moon in Sagittarius, things are going to calm down a little bit once we've got out of this lunar cycle. But we've seen Venus square Saturn, where we've seen challenges and delays in love and values and resources. Mercury square Saturn, which has been some really kind of difficult conversations and feeling a little bit where we're mentally being kind of delayed. And then finally the sun comes through. And when the sun squares Saturn, I think that, we also can have issues with like self-esteem, criticism, issues with authority figures, problems with husbands or father figures, bosses, people who are superiors or more dominant, like solar in our life in general. All taking place at 18 degrees, which does deal with health or coworkers or our schedule or where we're working or service industries. These are all like Virgo degrees. I think it's more pinning out under the theme of like health and whether or not, we're starting to see changes that are going on in terms of what's going on collectively with health, and are we becoming aware of like health challenges or where we need to make changes and tweaks and things of that nature. Regardless, a Sun square Saturn transit, I will tell you guys, it's a very short transit. You only feel this for a couple of days and then it's going to pass. And I'm really excited to announce that this is the end of all of these planets squaring Saturn. And now they're all going to start trining out to both Jupiter and Neptune. So there is like this empathic, emotional, spiritual, sensitive kind of release that's taking place in the midst of all of this. So you'll feel this for the next couple of days. It may be highlighting specifically in Scorpio, where there is a releasing, a detoxing, a purging that needs to happen to better facilitate whatever Saturn is basically asking you to achieve. Now, interestingly enough, this is more superior because all these planets are rising and they're squaring Saturn. So the Scorpio area of our life is just totally on fire. Like there is a sense of needing to deal with what is conscious fears, trauma, pain, regeneration. But Scorpio is also connected to like healing and desires and passion and the willingness to kind of let go of old patterns with the South Node there. All of that versing Saturn in Aquarius, which is like collective restriction, limits, karma, law, and regulation. Also, politics is going to be a big theme, politics and taxes, but you guys have heard that a bit already. I wanted to share with you guys 5 things that I learned about transit Saturn in a square to my natal sun this year. So my birthday is on the 11th. My solar return is actually going to be taking place on November the 10th because I'm born on 11/11, but my sun degree is at 18 degrees and change, almost 19 degrees of Scorpio. So all year long, I've actually been experiencing Saturn that's been in a square to my natal sun. And I thought that I would want to give you guys a more positive kind of perspective on the challenges of Saturn and what you may be experiencing in the midst of some of these Saturn transits. I also want to remind you guys that, like I said, this is a dismantling period because this is the 3rd quarter square. We start with the conjunction, the 1st square in Taurus, the opposition in Leo, and now the 3rd quarter square in Scorpio before we get to the sun coming back into conjunction with Saturn in Aquarius for the last time in 29 years. And this is going to be an interesting period because this is when we're like, okay, we're committing to this. There's a new Saturn cycle that's starting with the sun. This will be taking place on the 15th of February, 2023. And this will be when both Saturn and the sun are in the later degrees of Aquarius right before Saturn gets ready to enter into Pisces. So there can be this feeling between November 11th and February 15th that's like, what am I clearing out and getting rid of? Like, what do I need to clear and detox or remove or acknowledge or heal or work through before I get to mid-February of 2023? And then there is this sense of really showing up. I'm especially liking the fact that, you know, within a matter of days, we have that new moon that's going to be coming in Pisces, and we've got, you know, Mercury and Saturn still hanging out in Aquarius. So there is this like, okay, whatever your goals are with Saturn and Aquarius, usually I see when Saturn leaves a sign or when Saturn leaves a house, he leaves you a gift. So in theory, for many of you guys, somewhere around like the 3rd week of February, it may take until closer to when both Saturn and Mercury enter into Pisces, let's say the 1st week of March. That's when you're going to see the full effects of what you've been committing to and working really hard to achieve in the area where Aquarius is in your chart. And I mean, man, we've had almost 7 years, I guess I would say. Well, probably a little bit less. Let's say closer to like, yeah, maybe 6, 2.5, maybe almost 7, depending on retrogrades, because we've had Saturn that, you know, 2017 to 2020 went all the way through Capricorn. And then 2020 on until the beginning of 2023, we have Saturn in Aquarius. And what separates the two is like what we were initiating and starting in 2020, 2017 with Saturn in Capricorn, and then what became the kind of overall in the air theme, the seriousness 2020 to 2023. More on what's going to happen with this stellium in Pisces closer to the beginning of the year. I definitely have a lot to say about that, but you know, too long didn't read. Basically, you know, this mid-November through mid-February period can be a dismantling and a clearing out in preparation for being able to really show up in the Aquarius area of your life come February of next year. Okay. So I just wanted to share a little bit of food for thought with you guys. since I've had, transit Sun square my Saturn all year. I mean, it's so funny because I do readings for clients and they'll be like, well, what happens when this transit is over? Like, once I get to the new year, like I'm done having the Pluto conjunction, the Neptune square, this and that. But with astrology, there's something that's always coming, okay? There's always something going on. So I try not to like harp too much on any particular transit by making it sound like you just have to get to this point and then you get over it. I more like to approach it in a way that's like, look, if you just pass go and you collect $200, like you miss the whole process of actually going through the initiation of that planet. Same thing with Saturn return. I hear a lot of clients that are really stressed out about it or worried about it or, conjunction squares, whatever. And I like to remind my clients to be present in the process because there's something really amazing about actually going through that relay race. And if you just cut all of that and go directly to crossing the finish line, you don't really learn anything. So it's kind of cool to go through a conjunction, a square, an opposition, and then reflect and kind of look back on it and go, wow, that planet actually like did some damage, but also like really taught me a very valuable lesson. I would have to say that it's a little different because I have in the midst of the Saturn square, I've also had Uranus that's been in direct opposition to my Sun. So I've had Uranus oppose my Sun and I've had Saturn square my Sun, and it's just been like this like mashup because all of my personal fixed placements were between 18 and 22 degrees. So I've been kind of getting raked over the coal all year. So some of these things may be a little bit more specific to some of the oppositions involving Uranus, but for the most part, I feel like a lot of them do relate to Saturn. So 5 things I learned about transit Saturn square my natal Sun in Scorpio this year. Probably the most important thing that I learned is that there is a need to really release fears. And in the process of learning about releasing fears, at the core of that was some really big ego issues. And something that the Saturn transit to my Sun taught me is that it's not all about me. That I can't be making decisions purely about me, that I have to take other people into consideration. The Sun is such a personal planet, right? It's traditionally associated with the 5th house and the sign of Leo, where we go, my heart, my desire, my playtime, what I love, what I need, like, look at me, right? So when you have Saturn come into a hard angle with the Sun, there can be a sense of getting checked in that area of your life. So those of you guys who are like, okay, how does that apply to my chart? Look at where the Sun in Scorpio is right now. Like I said, it is a dismantling 3rd quarter square. So you're going to see where Saturn is basically saying to the Sun, like, that's enough, knock it off, like clear this out. You don't need to be doing this. And my situation was a little different. I had Saturn that was moving through my 5th house and it was sitting on my North Node square my Sun. And it made me realize that I really needed to unfortunately let some people go. And that in the midst of letting some people go, it wasn't about choosing me. It was more me realizing that in order to better kind of support my goals and to support also other relationships that were important in my life, I had to let some of these people go. And so definitely did feel some of the more oppressive energy of Saturn of being like, well, this is hard, or I feel alone, or whatever. But at the end of this, now that I'm coming out of this square, now that Saturn is direct, it's getting ready to come out of this square right now, I realized that fear was a huge thing that was taking up space in my life. And at the core of that was actually ego. I have to hold on to friends for these reasons. I have to maintain this kind of image. I have to, focus on this or that. I wouldn't let some things go. So the Saturn square actually was extremely humbling for me in many ways. And it made me realize that it's not just all about me. Number 2, timing is everything. Okay. And a lot of it has also been because there's been a lot of fixed placements that have been kind of, moving through the skies this year. Uranus in Taurus, the node in Scorpio and Taurus. Leo season was just like the grand hurrah because we had lots of squares and oppositions, a huge grand fixed cross. So part of it was almost like the locker combination in the cosmos. I always remind clients that's kind of how transits work. It's like a locker combination. You turn something one way, it stops. You go through the retrograde, you turn it another way, it stops, you turn it again, and it unlocks. Timing is everything. And I think part of that's also because Saturn is associated with time. He is the timekeeper. So he talks about cosmic timing, anything in regards to karma, and when you've gone through a certain series of events and kind of lessons, and then finally you get to this point where you have fully matured, even though the road was long and kind of rocky and there is lots of delays. Timing is everything. You know, I have found that with Saturn squares, I'm on everybody else's time but my own. That was definitely something that I knew going into this year was going to happen. I knew there were going to be times that I wanted to launch something and it wasn't going to work for other people who I was working with. Or there were times that I wanted to take off work, but I couldn't because I had timelines. So going into this year, I was kind of prepared for that. But now that it's kind of wrapped up, I realized that that does also kind of, in a way, kind of feed into the Saturn square Sun and how it affects the ego, realizing that I can't always be on my agenda. I have to take into consideration there's other people in my life, other people who have needs, and equally that I have to learn to crawl before I can run. That I can't go 0 to 60 and complete all of the things that I was aiming to complete within this solar year. I had to actually be present with the process and see things unfold or unlock before I could get to the future. So patience is everything. Timing is everything. Take your time. If you're having delays or you're feeling frustrated, just realize that this is a part of the process of the Saturn square. Number 3, and this is probably one of the bigger things for me, is that hard work does pay off. It does. You're not just a hamster spinning, on your wheel. That's not something that's kind of going on. Now that I'm coming to, my solar return, kind of reflecting on everything that's happened in this last year, I'm like, I complained a lot, but it was definitely worth it. Hard work pays off. I think that Saturn does reward you if you are patient and if you learn something, the correct way, and you really dedicate yourself and you're willing to stay the line and be consistent, even if that means long hours, even if that means you have to make sacrifices, even if that means that it doesn't always feel good all of the time. Saturn doesn't really care whether or not you're having a good time. He's like the PE teacher that's telling you, like, speed it up, take another lap. Like, he doesn't want to hear you complain. But I think that kind of reflecting back on this last year and just every single square, or opposition throughout this year was kind of a turning point where I felt like somebody turned the heat up on the pressure cooker. That's like, you got this, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. And I feel like even though it got intense there for a little bit, the hard work definitely paid off. And for me, it was a matter of sorting and sifting through my timeline, my schedule, having to make difficult decisions about where I feel like I'm investing my time best and what's ultimately going to make me the happiest with the square to my sun. And likely there were times that was like, okay, there's the happiest and then there's the most productive, and sometimes happiest wasn't most productive and vice versa. But now that I've come to the end of this year, I'm actually quite satisfied with how I've navigated this square. And there have been times where I had to make sacrifices and make changes in my schedule, or I had to cut things loose. And there were other times that I was just like, this has to wait. My happiness needs to come first. And I think that the squares have really shown me that there is like a season to some of this energy throughout the year, that I can't be super rigid and steadfast in one area consistently the whole year, that I have to leave room for the universe to intervene. And if I'm feeling the pressure to kind of let something go or commit to something more, listening to Saturn and paying attention to the timing really kind of led me to having more success in my life overall, just completely overall. Number 4, and this is a big one, and this is a huge thing with Saturn square the sun, is I realized that you can be your own biggest critic, okay? And this is really challenging because the sun is definitely about, obviously, your ego, right? Your happiness, but it's your talent, your creativity. It's like a little kid in kindergarten that's like, look what I painted. It wants to show everybody, right? So when the sun is positively aspected, generally you do those things, they're well received, everything kind of flows. You kind of see that you're kind of getting into the swing of what your life is like really about. But nothing takes the wind out of your sails like a Saturn square your sun. And definitely it can be you being your biggest critic. It can be you allowing yourself to be very critical, to be mean to yourself, to be giving yourself a hard time about something not being done well enough, good enough. on time. There can be a sense of you being a perfectionist, and giving yourself a hard time about not being able to achieve what can sometimes be very unrealistic goals. So if you're looking at how this is applying to your life, you can take a look at where Saturn is in Aquarius. Saturn is basically the teacher holding the yardstick or the ruler, kind of tapping its hand, being like, okay, are you getting your work done? All that Scorpio energy is being like, this is where I'm a mess, or I'm falling apart, or this crisis is happening, which is challenging my ability to meet that goal. And Saturn is going to give you a bit of a pass right now. And he's basically going to say, okay, clean it up, get rid of it. You know, let's let it go. Let's forget about it. Let's heal it. So that way you can really show up the way that you need to show up in February. But bottom line, with Sun square Saturn, it can be a day where you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you don't feel as positive, or you have a conversation and you share something with somebody and they can kind of give you some harsh criticism, or just something that knocks the wind out of your sails, you know? And I feel like intermittently throughout this whole year, that's definitely some stuff that I've dealt with. Because I've always kind of had like this weird feeling about coming back and being on YouTube and talking to people and, you know, reading comments and like all this stuff, because, you know, YouTube can kind of be like the seventh circle of hell in the comment section sometimes. But for the most part, I feel like it's been more positive than it's been negative. And I've definitely been probably harder on myself than anybody could have ever been in comments. But coming out of the square now, I realize that that doesn't help, right? That doesn't help you kind of move forward. And the only way to be able to truly feel, I guess I would say, you know, confident, is to be able to kind of like gas yourself up, and not in an egotistical way, but in a way that's like, you have to kind of get out of bed in the morning and remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing, and the willingness to kind of have a little bit of thicker skin and willing to kind of overlook things that people might say, and to just stay steadfast and stay on track with what it is that you're trying to create. And number 5, structure and routine is a big part of success, right? Structure and routine, Saturn's favorite words, is so important, whether this is staying organized, keeping a schedule, being on time, being consistent, having those meetings, like whatever it is, like whether it's you eating well and exercising, whether it's you know, trying to kind of hit deadlines, whether it's the willingness also to hold yourself accountable and like regularly, you know, meet with healthcare professionals or having meetings, whatever. This has been such a huge thing for me, and it hasn't even necessarily just been work related, although a lot of it has, because there was something that shifted partway through the year where I was like, if I do videos and if these videos come out and I'm consistent and I'm putting them out like every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe I'm going to see growth. Or putting it out, then once we got the days kind of nailed down, then it was like, oh, well, they're going to do better if we put them out at 7 a.m. So then there was like this like less erratic posting schedule. And then I got into the flow of being like, I shoot on these days, and that's when I get my videos done and I leave enough time to do my research and do this, and having to rearrange my schedule and moving personal things and moving clients and other things to be able to be like, look, this is what I have to do. So everything has to kind of flow around this content schedule. That's when I started seeing shift happen in a very positive way. So I think that structure and routine is so important when it comes to success. So it doesn't matter if it's setting a goal that's a year from now, or if it's setting a goal that's for a week, or maybe it's just having a to-do list that's, you know, constantly running. So you're making sure that you're staying efficient. I thank Saturn for that, because I think it's really kind of shown me that I have to make the time for the things that are most important to me and the things that are going to make me happiest. Because at the end of the day, the sun is about joy, right? It is about what we create and what we really love to show the world. So I think without that kind of nudge that we get from Saturn to really focus on timing and structure, we would never really make the time for it. And a big part of that also was me asking myself, what am I doing with my time? Do I enjoy what I'm doing with my time? Am I feeling productive? What's coming out of all the time that I'm setting aside doing things? So it's really had me structure my days different. It's had me get up earlier in the morning, work later into the evenings. And yeah, it's been really amazing. And it's taught me to just kind of stay the path of being consistent, and that having structure is actually a really positive thing, because it's going to help me be more productive. And with that, I will close and just hope that you guys are doing well in the midst of this Sun square Saturn. Look for all the cosmic goodies that are going to be playing out after this as we start seeing, you know, Venus and Mercury and the Sun come into trines with Jupiter and Neptune, where there is a lot of room for emotional release, feeling also very divinely connected and being able to really kind of tap into the wisdom of the higher mind and anything in regards to our dreams, spirituality, mysticism, all of that stuff. I'll have more on that coming for you guys later this week when we do Astro Weather on Sunday. Just a couple heads up. So on Saturday, we're going to be doing live tarot at 7:00 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to get a reading, join us. It's going to be by donation. I'd love to see you there. We will be having Astro Weather this week. We're going to start talking about all of the transits that are going to be kind of cooling off now, all of the goodies that are happening this weekend. You guys aren't going to get a video before the weekend, but I'm going to tell you so much easier once we get to Saturday morning. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, the weather kind of clears up a little bit. Like I said, it's my birthday on November 11th, so I've seen a couple people pop in and say that they also have their birthday at 11/11, or that they were surprised that I'm a Scorpio. Surprise, this is my coming out of the closet. And hopefully you guys enjoy this. If you have any stories or anything you'd like to share about Saturn square the Sun, or if you were born with that natally, or if you've been going through the transit, we'd love to hear how it's affecting you. Let me know what you've overachieved. Let's keep it positive in the comments. Let's talk about what you have achieved as a result of the Saturn square and how it's been playing out for you this year and what you've learned. I'm having a drop that I'm going to be doing on November 11th, so it'll be Friday morning, so you guys are going to see this tomorrow. I'm going to be finally putting on my website my brand new 2023 astrological calendar. A lot of love went into this. The Beyond the Veil team, we designed this, we put this together, 12 months of astrological transits, along with recommendations for incense, oils, herbs, minerals, rituals, all kinds of stuff, and all of the biggest transits, including all of the new full moons and eclipses, retrogrades for 2023. So I'm going to be putting this on sale on my website in honor of my birthday on Friday morning. So if you guys want to check out my website, my information is below at beyondtheveiltarot.com. I'll be posting about this on my socials, and I will also be sending something out probably in the newsletter. If you haven't already signed up for my newsletter, you can do so on my website, and you'll be alerted when we have new products, as well as when we have sales or other things going on for courses. Gonna have all kinds of sales on my courses, including my brand new Astro Level 2 201 that's coming up in the new year. It'll all be going on sale during the holiday weekend for Thanksgiving. So Black Friday, Cyber Monday, all that stuff, we're doing a big sale. So if you want to be on the up and up with that, make sure you join my newsletter. Otherwise, I will see all of you guys very soon. Enjoy the rest of your week, and you take care.